quick review of Mod 1? No. All right. Hey, they said no. We don't want to do that shit. Not. No, it's okay. Look, just like a quick review of it. Hold on. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can share this screen with you because I got the hell. There we go. I don't know if these are all the topics, but I know these are some of the topics that you guys went over, right? So can somebody tell me what sound is? And can everybody see this, first of all? I assume that's a yes because I see a lot of heads nodding. All right, so somebody tell me what sound is. Uh-huh. Oh, that's it? Yeah. So, yeah, textbook answer. It's basically periodic disturbance of molecules happening in some sort of elastic medium, right? It has to happen within an elastic medium for it to actually produce sound. So, does anybody know the basic mathematical representation of sound? Like, what's the basic function that you guys think of when you think about sound? Like, what's the name of that waveform? What's the name of this waveform? Huh? Yeah, sine wave. Exactly. And does anybody know how they got to that sine wave? Did they talk about that in Mod 1? So basically, you guys said that sound is the vibrations happening in the air, right? The molecules in the air. So when I'm talking to you, my voice is having the molecules around my mouth compress and come closer together, and then they kind of disperse, and then they compress and come closer together, right? Because I'm vibrating them, correct? Right? So they go through what we call compressions and rarefactions. Exactly. You got it. You got it. So it goes through cycles of compressions and rarefactions until it reaches your ear, and then it gets processed by, your neural networks, goes to your brain, and then you go, "Oh, this motherfucker's talking again." Right? That's basically how it happens. So if you look at this diagram, it might make a lot of sense, but this is how they get the actual sine wave. When the molecules in the air are tightly and densely compacted and compressed together, you get what's called a peak. Whereas when they're rarefacting and more dispersed out, you get what's called a valley or a dip, whatever you want to call it, right? And when a certain number of peaks and valleys happen in 1 second, that unit is called, starts with an F. Very good. Yes. Number of cycles per second is frequency, right? And what is frequency related to? Why do we even talk about frequency? So let's put it this way. You guys seem to be fans of hip hop, R&B, and stuff, right? So when we talk about different frequencies, isn't it important to know what those frequencies are and what they do? Because like in hip hop and R&B, a lot of the low end is tightly controlled using something called an equalizer. An equalizer basically, yeah. Very good. Very good. Frequency is related to pitch and tone. Very good. Very good. Do you guys know the idea of tone and timbre? Do you know that concept? So every sound that you can think of, whether it's a guitar or a piano or my voice, whatever it is, it's made up of all these different types of waves, right? Different types of sine waves, all adding together at different frequencies. And those form my voice, my tone. Now, if I sing a middle C note, it's going to sound a certain way. I'm not going to sing a middle C note because I don't know what middle C is offhand. Is anybody perfect pitch over here? No? No perfect pitchers? Wouldn't it be... No, so like if I would, so why do you think middle C on a piano sounds different from middle C on a guitar? It's because they're both producing the fundamental pitch for middle C, but the overtones that are related to them are completely different. And it's different because of the material and the wood and the string and all that stuff that's adding together. The overtones are what determine your tone, and the fundamental is what determines the actual pitch. Does that make sense? It's also why you can take two different guitars, two different models, you play middle C, and they sound completely different. It's because they're the materials, the strings, the wood, everything about them is different. So even though the fundamental frequency, middle C, is the same, the overtones or the harmonics, right? Do you guys know what those are? The multiples of those fundamental frequencies. Those are different and adding up in different ways. And that's what's causing the actual tone of the instrument. Go ahead. What was the question? Yeah. Hmm? Well, that's how they. Well, they make guitars based on. Are you saying like how did they actually get the note to play middle C? I didn't understand the question. Oh, and then he ghosted. So so I just right. So I just told you that the fundamental pitch is what determines. I'm sorry, the fundamental frequency is what determines pitch, right? So so who what is middle C? Let's actually find out what middle C is. Middle C frequency. What is it? 262 hertz. All right? So at 262 hertz, you will always get middle C. Always. Right? And what is frequency? We just said number of cycles per second. So if you have a string and you pluck it and it vibrates 262 times per second, you're always going to get middle C. Now the difference is when you have different bodies and different strings and different wood and different, you know, textures that form from those bodies. That's when you get different tones. Does that make sense? It's fascinating shit, right? You never think about why middle C sounds different every other place. It's fucking wild. I didn't know that until like 6 years. I just realized that I didn't even introduce myself. I just I just asked everybody to introduce themselves, and I didn't even talk about me. I'll talk about myself later. Um, but yeah, that's middle C. Maybe I'll do it when we come back from break. How's that? Cool. So that's frequency, timbre, tone, pitch. That's how they're all related, right? Um, does anybody know what the speed of sound is in air? Good. 1130 what? Per. Yes, very good. Speed is always in per seconds, but yes, 1130 feet per second. Does anybody know if sound is faster in water or air? And don't Google this shit. Yeah, just why? Oh shit! You're the first batch of students to get that shit right. So unless you guys Googled it, congratulate yourselves. That's awesome. You can see you guys typing in the background. What the fuck is this shit? Oh, he drilled that shit. Nice. That's good. No, but it's crazy to think about that sound is faster in water because the molecules are so much more dense in water. It's obvious that the rate of transmission of the energy is going to be faster. Again, that's another thing I just learned. I'm young, guys. Give me a pass. I just learned this shit like what? Light bulb. It's like connecting the dots, right? You have like these different dots and then suddenly you realize how they connect. I get it. Totally get it. Totally get it. Cool. So let's see. What else did you guys talk about? You guys talked about analog and digital stuff at all? You guys talked about connectors, right? Cables and stuff? Okay. So what do you know about analog and what do you know about digital? Like, what's the difference? Okay, so analog, whenever you talk about analog, analog refers to things that are in the electrical domain. So anything where electricity is involved in terms of like signal transmission. So a microphone, there's electricity involved. You know those console that we talked about? The one that we're gonna do is an analog console. So there's electricity running through those channels to replicate the signal that you want to either record, mix, or master, right? So it's all electrical based. Digital is when you talk about Pro Tools or Ableton or all these computer softwares where you deal with computer language, which is zeros and ones, right? And there's always this kind of tension, or let's just say uh, cohesive, or rather, let's call it a good interface between analog and digital. So if you have a laptop and a little interface and a microphone, you can sing into that microphone. The microphone will generate an electrical signal, and then that electrical signal will convert to a digital signal to get it into your computer. That's the entire signal flow of what's happening in those interfaces. Does that make sense? Because the computer doesn't understand electrical signals; it understands zeros and ones, right? Do you guys know like the basic signal flow of a recording studio? It's basically what I just said. It's basically what I just said, right? So you sing into a microphone. A microphone basically converts acoustic energy to what? Electrical energy, right? Every microphone needs what? Yeah, fucking preamp. That's it. Fucking preamp. Every microphone needs a fucking preamp. Never forget that. Because the signal that a microphone generates, the electrical signal, is so weak. It's like we say, like minus 60 dB is like microphone level. It's so weak that you couldn't actually use it for anything. So you need a preamplifier to boost that signal up to what we call line level. Line level is like plus 4 dB, or in like smaller studios it's like minus 10 dB, which is way louder than minus 60, right? So you always need a preamp to take the signal from microphone level to line level. But once it's line level, then you can start to use it in your DAW. You can start to send it to speakers, all that stuff, right? So your microphone goes into a preamp. Then it goes into what's called an analog to digital converter, right? An A to D converter. That's what gets recorded into your Pro Tools or your Ableton or Logic or whatever, your software. But then in order to hear the music back or to hear your voice back, it needs to go through the reverse process. So that 0 and 1, all those zeros and ones that you recorded, now need to go back into a digital to analog converter, or a D to A converter, or DAC. That needs to go to some sort of headphone system or speakers. Exactly. Does that make sense? That's the entire signal flow of what happens in a basic recording studio. All right. Now, I guess you guys all know that there are analog EQs and digital EQs, right? And there's analog compressors and digital compressors. These are all different tools that you can use to manipulate the sound. An equalizer basically allows you to change the gain of different frequencies. You can either add to certain frequencies or reduce to certain frequencies. There's analog and digital versions of themselves. The advantages of the analog is that, one, since it's purely in the electrical domain, a lot of people claim that it sounds a lot purer, a lot better. The amount of versatility you have with changing those frequencies and how they sound is really, really good. And also, because analog changes over time, if I bought an analog EQ and you bought an analog EQ, the same one, and 20 years down the line we met up again for some strange reason, our EQs would not be exactly the same. They would have changed over time based on just humidity, temperature, somebody fucking smoking weed in front of it, or somebody taking it to the wrong place and bashing it over the head to get some money from somebody. I don't know, whatever you did with your EQ, right? So it's going to be different. Analog always changes, right? It is. Exactly. Exactly. You create your own sound. You can even mod your analog gear so you can replace the components to get different sounds. It's crazy what you can do with analog gear. It's pretty awesome. Whereas digital, if you and I both bought the same EQ, well, 20 years from now, if we've both updated it accordingly, it'll sound exactly the same. So pros and cons to that, right? Pros are analog, you get this unique kind of sound. Con is that you get different sounds, and so it's not as reliable. Whereas digital, it's like you're always going to get the same sound consistently. So I hope that kind of makes you understand why in live scenarios you usually use a digital board, because when you do sound check for a bunch of bands back to back, you want to save certain settings and go back to them whenever the band is performing. Whereas if it was analog gear, you'd have to write all that shit down and then try to fucking, oh my god, where the fuck was this thing? It's not as efficient. So digital consoles are really good for that. All right? X32 is wild. I mean, it's, yeah, Kelvin. Kelvin just said that? Kevin. I'll get your names. It's not because I hate you. I'll get it. Yeah, X32 is awesome, dude. That's so cool that you're working with that. What other connectors did you guys learn about? Or what connectors did you guys learn about? What do microphones use? XLRs. What are the cables? You guys know what RCA cables are? Are RCA's sorry? I didn't hear you, so I'm gonna. Okay, cool. USB cables. We talked about Thunderbolt cables. Those are all what? Digital cables, right? Whereas XLR is analog. TRS. Do you guys know the difference between TRS and TS cables? Very good. Balanced and unbalanced. And what's the difference between balanced and unbalanced? It's very easy. One has 2 pins. The other one has 3 pins. Right? And do you remember why? Okay. Huh? No. So well, you have to ground everything. So both of them have a ground, but one of them has a hot and a cold and a ground, whereas the other one has just one and a ground, right? So unbalanced is the one with just 2 pins, a ground, and 1 cable, and that's just designed to pass the signal through. The other one, a balanced cable, has a hot, cold, and a ground, right? 3 pins. And the reason for that is that you're going to have the signal. You're going to have a phase-flipped version of the signal, a 180-degree phase-flipped version, and the ground. Once it passes to the other side, that phase-flipped signal is now flipped back so that any noise that was collected during the transmission will get canceled out. It's fucking, like, ingenious if you think about it. Yeah, it's crazy. So you're going to get a lot less interference and radio frequencies and stuff with balanced cables, which is why XLRs are usually... Yep, just like XLRs. XLRs are balanced. Speakers? No, microphones. Speakers are usually TS. They're usually just unbalanced. The other thing with TRS is that, or with balanced cables, is that you can send stereo signals because there's 2 pins available. Right? Whereas TS cables are usually just for mono signals. And you can actually, technically, you can interchange them. So if you needed to use a TS cable, you could use a TRS cable. So TS cables are the ones that you usually use for guitars and basses and all those. Whereas TRS cables are like the ones that you have for your headphones. Right? You can even see it. I'm not going to unplug my head. Well, maybe I will. It's not a big deal, right? You guys have seen a TRS. Yes. What remains unbalanced? Uh, no. The cable would be balanced, and the connector would be unbalanced, or the jack would be unbalanced. It's not always advisable to do that, but it is possible. Does that make sense? Yeah, I know what you mean by yeah. The connection itself would be a combination of the two, technically, and it's not very common that you would do that. Even though I said it was totally fine to do that. All right, you guys. Did you guys learn about Y cables? Like splitters, basically. Okay, they're just cables that you can split the signal off into more than one, right? It can be for auxes. It's mainly used for headphones. Yeah. What else? What other cables do you guys go over? No clue. Very good. ADAT cables. You guys know that? Yeah. ADAT cables are awesome because they carry up to 8 channels. It's pretty cool. Actually, they can carry more. No, they can't. Huh? They're fragile. Yeah, they're fragile. Yeah. MIDI cables. You guys heard of those? How many pins on a MIDI cable? I'll let you guys figure that out. Very good. Microphones. Let's talk about microphones. What microphones do you guys learn about? What are the three main ones you use in the studio? Good. Last one. Starts with a D. Very good. Dynamic, condenser, ribbon are the primary ones that you'll use. Dynamic microphones, they mainly work off of that, the mechanical function. Do you guys know how it works with the coil, right? And how it then that induces electricity, right? That produces a sound. Condenser microphones use what? What do they use? Somebody's, yeah, phantom power. You have to use phantom power on a condenser because you have to charge the capacitors in the microphone. What do you not give a phantom power to ever? Yeah, especially the vintage old ribbon microphones. Never do that. The newer ribbon microphones, some of them have a built-in resistor path, but don't always count on that. You can destroy a ribbon microphone, like 4 grand gone, just by touching a button. So be very careful with that. Um, Unless you're using an active ribbon microphone, in which case you do need phantom power. But I'm not going to confuse you with that. Cool. What else did you learn in Mod 1? Did you talk about consoles at all? What'd you talk about? Oh, very good. Very good. Does anybody remember the difference between inline and split? You don't have to. I'll get into it next week because we're going to be in the console. I'm just curious if anybody remembers. I'll... One for love? Okay, live. I was like, one's for love, one's for your enemy. Oh, what? uh, well, one of them is primarily used live. Um, the split consoles are usually used live, but yeah, I'll get into those next week then. Cool. And you guys know what a DAW is? What does it stand for? Warfare? You could, you know what? Being in this business, yeah, you could say that, but no, it's digital audio workstation. That's what it is. All right. Anything else you went over in Mod 1? I know you guys are fucking dying for this break. I'll get it to you. Don't worry. Oh, the history of music. Oh no, don't worry. No, that's good. I mean, I learned music theory when I was a lot younger, but I hated it. So I'm not gonna ask you to review that shit. Fuck that. No, but as much as I dislike it, I don't want to trash it too much because sometimes I think when I get stuck writing or something, I sometimes think I'm able to fix it because I know music theory. I have friends who never learned music theory who say that they wish they did because sometimes when they're in the studio with an artist, sometimes they feel like they can't relate and it's really tough. But yeah, it's good to know some sort of basics of it, but it's definitely not necessary. Oh, fuck that. I don't know. Yes, what's that? What's I mean, there's it's in the title. It's in the title. Signal to noise ratio. How much signal versus how much noise. And you always want a bigger signal to noise ratio. You don't want a lot of noise because once you start to compress and boost it up, you're going to hear a lot of noise. People hate that shit. I already talked about that. Different types of decibels. Talked about that. What are some polar patterns? Talk about some polar patterns. Give me some. Cardioid, supercardioid, kind of the same. Wait, super what? Are you just talking bidirectional? But yeah, good. Those are some of the main ones, right? Cardioids, huh? Supercardioid, yeah. So cardioid, supercardioid, bidirectional, omnidirectional. Those are some of the main ones. Um, you guys learned uh, hypercardioid and supercardioid are very similar, but basically a supercardioid is like a thinner version. So what is a cardioid? That's the heart-shaped one, the one that everybody knows, right? So if the microphone's facing that way, the cardioid pattern is like right in front of it. So you have to stand in front of it. If you're behind it, it'll reject you, just like everybody in my life, right? So you always want to be in front of the microphone, right? Supercardioid is similar. It's a lot thinner, but there is a pickup in the back, and there's rejection at 120 degrees off axis. I use supercardioids. I use supercardioids on snare microphones because, whenever you're recording snare, especially for like rock drums and like tight R&B drums, the thing is that the snare mic usually tends to pick up a lot of the hi hat. But what you can do is if you place a supercardioid in the correct position, you can pick up more snare and reject the hi hat at about 120 degrees. So it's a pretty cool tool, and then you can process your snare and add all kinds of compression and high end to it. So it's a good to know the different polar patterns, not just where they pick up, but where they reject as well. It's really useful to know that stuff. Um, Bidirectional is obviously picks up both sides, but rejects on the 90 degrees. Omnidirectional picks up everything, right? I don't know anything about music history. I know very little about music history, so no point in going over that. I don't know anything about it. You guys learned music history? That's crazy. Yeah. Ooh. I'm glad I didn't go to SAE. Oh, the golden ears shit? Yeah, that stuff's useful. I mean, I gave up on that, but like it's useful. Yeah, yeah. You know what, dude? Like the best way, at least me personally, the best way I was able to improve is just by mixing over and over again and listening to reference tracks and just being like, "Oh, how does that snare hit? Well, what does hit mean? Hit means what? It has a lot of attack or a lot of, and how do I get that? Well, I got to use a compressor. How do I use a compressor? Oh, I don't know. I got to figure that out. You know what I mean? That's how I did it. It's like the golden ears was so fucking boring, man. I couldn't do that. It was just like, Jesus, kill me now. Listen to sine tones every day. Oh my god. Um, Man, I'm talking so much shit about it, but it's actually it's good. If you've done it, it's actually good. It's a good tool to know. Um, cool. Is that it? That's all you guys learned in Mod 1? Or like a basic overview of it? Cool. You guys want to take your break then? I'm sorry, I will do an introduction after the break, but I really gotta pee like really badly. I've been holding this in for a while right now.